I grew up in New York, not the city, but the suburbs. My mom and dad both worked long hours to pay for my college in the future and to be able to get me whatever I wanted and needed. When I was 13, my mom got pregnant with my sister Shailene. A lot of people thought I would be jealous, but I was actually excited because I had always wanted to be a big sister. Also, my mom told me she would raise my allowance $25 a week if I babysat when she was born. Of course, I accepted because that would put me getting $100 a week, which I needed because I loved clothes and accessories. Shailene was born at the end of 2015. She was the cutest baby I had ever seen. I had never felt so much love in my life for such a little thing. She had blue eyes and sandy brown hair, just like me. She was born small, so had to stay in the hospital for a couple weeks after being born. My mom was 41 when she had her, and it was a hard pregnancy on her. She and my dad had planned her, and my mom had had some kind of shots to help her get pregnant. Sorry I don't know much about it, but I do know my mom got her wish after years of trying to get pregnant again. I started babysitting her after my mom went back to work. I had so much fun babysitting her. We never had any company when we were alone at home together, except for my grandmother, because everyone who knew us knew not to come over unless my parents were home. After Shailene's first birthday is when it started. My dad was on a business trip in Toronto and my mom had gone with him for her vacation. I was 15 then, and could stay home for a week taking care of the baby with no problems. One night I was up late studying for a test I had the next day. It was around 11 o'clock at night, and I had went downstairs for a snack. I had a Labrador retriever and she was one of those dogs that barked at everything that moved. When I got to the kitchen, she was at the sliding glass door growling at it. It kind of freaked me out, so I didn't turn the kitchen light on. I peeked out of the second back door that was in the laundry room, but didn't see anything. So I just figured she'd seen a raccoon or something and turned the light on and got a snack and went back upstairs. When I got to the very top of the stairs, Daisy started barking. I rolled my eyes because I knew it was going to wake the baby. Shailene started screaming. I grabbed her out of her crib and went downstairs. I had never seen Daisy like this. Yes, she barked at everything that knocked on the door, but she was crouched down snarling, showing her teeth and barking. Her hair on the back was sticking up. I turned the back porch light on and saw a man standing there with a smile on his face, waving. I had never seen this man before in my life. I knew all my parents' friends, especially the ones that would come to the house. I closed the blinds to the door and called the cops. I was so scared but was trying to stay brave for the baby. My grandmother thankfully lived next door, so I called her after I got off the phone with the cops. She told me to stay in the house until the cops got there and then I would come over to her house. It took the cops 10 minutes to get there. Once they did, I let them in. They asked me a lot of questions. My grandma sat beside me holding the baby and they suggested that we stay with her. Considering she only had a one-bedroom house, she instead stayed with us. We had an alarm that we never used, but I turned it on and went to bed. A policeman sat on our house that night. A few days went by without any trouble. I thought maybe he was some mental patient that escaped from the hospital or something, so I shrugged it off. I told my parents not to come home and enjoy their time together. The last night before they came home, I stayed at the house by myself while Shailene stayed with my grandmother. I don't know why I didn't ask my grandmother to stay again, or why she didn't stay anyway. It was a Friday, and I always loved staying up until about 2 or 3 in the morning. It was around 1:30 in the morning when I heard something being thrown at my window. I got really scared and couldn't move. I knew the alarm on the house was on, and Daisy was downstairs, so I would be safe. I called my grandma, but she must have had her cell phone in the living room or something, and she kept her home phone unplugged when she went to sleep. I didn't call the cops because I knew how this would go. I would call them, and then they would get here, and then the wannabe intruder would leave, making me look like a complete fool. It stopped, and I fell asleep and was awoken around 6 a.m. to Daisy barking and howling. I ran downstairs with a baseball bat and went to the back door. I do not know what was with this dude in the back door. I opened the blinds and slightly looked out to see the same guy standing there. I screamed, not meaning to, but it scared me. I ran upstairs, called the cops, and then called my grandmother. While I was on the phone with my grandma, the alarm went off. I pissed myself literally because I hadn't used the bathroom when I was jolted awake by Daisy's barks. I climbed out of my window, which had a little slab I could step on to get to the roof. I had my cell phone. My grandmother had been disconnected. I was so terrified. But I soon heard the sirens, then what sounded like a blast. I was thinking, that was a gunshot. That was a gunshot. He has a gun. I thought it was completely over for me. I had never had a boyfriend. I wanted to say goodbye to my parents and my sister. Then I heard it. Cindy, Cindy. It was my grandma sticking her head out of my bedroom window. She pulled me in. I was in tears. The police burst in. The guy was lying there, moaning in pain. I never took my grandma so literally when she would say that she would never let someone mess with me. I just thought that was something adults said. She meant it, though. He wasn't deceased, but she got him in the shoulder, and of course, what looked like raspberry sauce, but obviously wasn't, was all over my MacBook, tablet, and carpet. But they got him. I was okay. My sister was okay. My grandmother was okay. But my whole week with my sister was ruined because of this prick. They loaded him into the back of the ambulance, handcuffed to his rolling bed. If some are wondering, my grandmother stayed up all night just to sit in her chair knitting, watching our house outside of her window. She was the best. I miss her every day. My parents were home by that night and explained to me that Todd, the guy my grandmother took care of, was the guy my dad had fired a week and a half prior. They went through that man's computer after arresting him, and he planned on ending all of us. But when he found out it was just me here, I guess he didn't know the baby was. He took it a step further in his electronic diary, saying, "Well, I lost my job. Now he is going to lose something dear to him." And obviously he meant me. I was so glad when they got home. I didn't want to stay by myself for a while after that, but everything turned out fine. Todd got 30 years because of the threat, and he had an unregistered gun on him, plus the home invasion, and soon some serious warrants showed up. He wouldn't be getting out for a long, long time. My grandma passed away in 2021. I miss her something awful each and every day. My name is Jory. I'm a 47-year-old female. This story takes place after our college graduations in the year 2001. I graduated high school when I was 17 years old and took a 2-year break to save money before I went to college, so I could buy me a car and support myself while still living with my parents. While in college, I met some of the most amazing people and friendly staff and teachers, professors that I have ever met in my life, and that includes K through 12. I met Nathan first. Nathan was an amazing man, down to earth, sweet, kind, caring, but could be a pushover and let people run all over him, and that is how we met. I had seen him in one of my classes and knew he was gay. He didn't hide it. I mean, he wasn't flamboyant or anything, you just knew. He was more like Mitch in Modern Family. He was letting a couple people in our class drive his car, and I could tell that he didn't want to, but he said yes anyway. I sat right behind him, and that's how I knew this. I decided to follow him outside where he was walking with the guys to his car. I ran up to him and said, "Babe, change of plans. I'm not getting a ride from Jenny. Can you take me home?" He looked at me and was confused for a second, because we had never met before. Then I winked, assuring him that I was there for a good reason. He grinned and then looked at them with a gesture that said, "I don't want to have my head chewed off." They said, "That's fine, man. We can find another way." After the guys walked away, he said thank you, put his hand out for me to shake it, and I did. "Hey, do you want to go grab a bite to eat?" I asked, and then said, "As friends, trust me, I know you're gay. I am too." He said, I figured you were, I just didn't know for sure, plus we have never talked before. I was and am your stereotypical lesbian. I have long hair, but I dress like a teenage boy. Well, then, I was a little worse than I am now. From there on out, Nathan and I were best friends. Sonia. I met her my senior year of high school, circa 1995. I started dating her sister Tasha that next year. Sonia and Tasha were fraternal twins and were not as close as you'd think twins would be, but we all hung out together anyway. But you let someone mess with one of them, they would take up for each other in a minute. Nathan, Sonia, Tasha, and I met Scott and Sandy in our senior year of college. They were brother and sister and hung out with us occasionally. Though I loved them and they were my friends, I wasn't as close to those two as I was my other friends. I liked Scott and Sandy, but I just thought they were group friends, not call it 3 in the morning friends, if you know what I mean. Let's get to the story. All of us were hanging out at my apartment one night, and Scott suggested that we all go camping. It was the first week out of college, and we were all bored. I thought this was a good idea. We were all kind of into hiking, wilderness things, and we loved riding bikes through woods, hang gliding, and much more, so it was easy. We all decided to go camping. Nathan's dad had an RV that we could use. Because we were driving all the way to Yellowstone National Park, we figured a 16-hour drive there in a car would be completely claustrophobic, more than an RV would be. A week after deciding to go, we packed up and were on our way to Yellowstone. We decided to stop for the night at the RV park that was close to an exit we took and rest there and start fresh in the morning. We got to the RV park around 6 p.m. after about a 6-hour drive. There were hardly any other RVs or campers there. There were 3 to be exact, not counting our RV. We decided to bring my car because it was in better shape than everyone else's, so we hitched it to the back of the RV. We were getting antsy and all decided to go get some food and hit a bar. We all agreed, and that is where we were headed off to. You know, sometimes I wish I could go back and just say, let's play Scrabble here and get takeout. I can't go back, so I have to live with a decision that most people don't blame me for, but some do blame me for. While at the bar, I went out to smoke a cigarette, and I was about halfway done and noticed this guy in this blue Ford Taurus just staring at me. I can still remember the first time I looked at him. Brown hair, blue eyes, leather jacket, goatee, hair with gel in it. I was right outside of the bar because Tasha and I had just gotten into a huge argument, and I wasn't about to get kicked out of a bar because she didn't know how to hold her liquor. When I saw this guy and noticed he was staring at me, I remember thinking, I've never wanted to be a non-smoker more than right now. I didn't notice the guy at first. I was on the phone with Wyatt, my brother, and I looked up when I took a hit off my cig, and he was 2 cars back from the one I was facing parked on the curb, just staring, and he had a creepy grin on his face, to say the least. I remember being so freaked out that I walked back into the bar hyperventilating and everyone in the friend group asking if they wanted me to have the police or ambulance called. I said no, but I did say I was ready to roll. So we did. About 10 minutes down the road, we figured out that someone was following us, and the first thing that popped into my head was the guy outside the bar. I asked what kind of car it was, afraid of finding out, even though I was driving. Nathan turned around and said a black or blue Ford Taurus, and I said, shit, it's him. My friend thought I was overreacting, and at the same time I had wondered the same. But I knew in my gut this was the same guy from the bar, sitting in the car outside. When I put my turn signal on to turn into the RV park, everyone was convinced I was telling the truth because he followed us for the entire 25 minutes. We didn't get out of the car, we just sat there for 5 minutes, hoping and praying that this man was going to take off. He just sat there behind us. Then he turned his car on and left. We all were so freaked out, we were calling from our cell phones to see how far the next RV parking lot was. We couldn't find one close enough, so we decided to stick it out for the night. Worst mistake ever. We were leaving in the morning anyway. Around 1 in the morning, we were all asleep and heard the loudest bang ever. Scott and Nathan looked out of the window to see the creepy man standing right outside. The guy was huge, and there was no way Nathan and Scott could take him. Nathan started the RV and peeled out of there, saying we would come back to get my car. At this point, I was on my phone with the police, and they were on their way. I could care less about my car. I said it would be around 10 minutes for the cops to get here, which felt more like an hour. We drove down the long road trying to stay on it. The creep was following us, so we were staying where the cops would know where we were. We were driving in the direction we knew they were going to be coming. The guy in the Ford Taurus rammed the back of the RV and it shook bad. The second time it nearly took us off the road. Nathan was saying that we should stop and reason with the guy, and we all looked at him like he was plumb crazy, because it was the craziest idea that I'd ever heard. A few minutes later, you would have thought I got a hold of some stupid pills, and I told him to pull over. No, we didn't even think this guy was armed, and yes, I'm being dead serious. Did not cross our minds. Nathan pulled over, and as he did, the Taurus pulled over. I remember Nathan saying he was scared, and I didn't want to do it, and I kept pressuring him into doing it so the stalking would stop. I guess I wasn't patient enough for the cops to come. Eventually, after a few minutes just sitting there with the guy behind us, we decided to all go confront him. Worst mistake ever. Had any of us known what was in store for us, we would have kept driving until the police showed up. We all exited the RV, and as we did, he opened his car door and got out. As we all approached him, I got nauseous and wanted out of this so bad. I mean, all we wanted was to have a fun trip before getting back to our everyday lives. The first thing this creep said when he got out of the car was, "Who's the one trying to keep me from her?" He was pointing at me. That is when I vomited right there. My nerves were so shot. Creep said, "Well, you must be nervous, sweetheart," laughing as he said it. I didn't respond, but Nathan said, "You know what, you effing prick? We came out here to see what your problem is and why you are stalking us." As soon as it came out of his mouth, I knew it was a mistake. Without saying a word, this guy pulled out a 9mm Beretta and got Nathan in the chest so quickly we didn't even know what happened. I screamed, and then the creep said, "Now I shouldn't have a problem." He grabbed me while Scott and the girls were trying to pull me away, but they were no match for him. As soon as he put me in the car, 2 cop cars came barreling down the road, getting out, drawing weapons, and then the creep just stood there with his hands up. We were so thankful they got there when they did, but we had to wait for an ambulance for Nathan. The cop said there was no chance of him making it because he was bleeding too much. It was the scariest thing we all had ever seen. To this day, it's still the scariest thing I've ever seen. Nathan made it to the hospital and survived, thank God, but it had its up and downs. Nathan had to have several surgeries, but the bullet completely missed his heart. Where Creep was so much taller than Nathan when he shot him, it was at a down position, and the bullet went right through his spine, which paralyzed him. He could still use his arms, but nothing else. I have always felt this to be my fault, because I coached him out of the RV and shouldn't have, knowing it was a bad idea. It is guilt that has weighed me down. I don't want pity, but I mean, you can tell that I'm in my 40s, but it looks like I'm in my late 50s, early 60s. I drank for over 20 years after this. I'm in therapy and have been sober for 4 years and make the best out of it every day. Like I said, Tasha and I are still together. We got married in 2015 and have 2 children together. Nathan and I, well, our friendship ended not long after the incident because he went into a huge depression, which is not surprising. Well, he got addicted to the painkillers they were giving him, and then the hard stuff. He began a heroin addiction a year after the incident, and on June 5th, 2004, OD'd and died. I was completely heartbroken and shattered. He was my first friend in college. He was so smart and talented. I miss him every day. I haven't been to his grave in a while because I don't believe it is him. His body, yes, but everything else is gone, and it is just a hard topic for me. Sandy died in 2003. She took her own life. Seeing what happened to Nathan really messed her up. If I were to say who it messed up the most, it would be her. She used to have nightmares, and she lost a lot of her mental health from it. I also haven't talked to Scott and Sonia for almost 10 years. We just lost contact. And lastly, Creep got life in prison for what he did and carrying an illegal firearm. He was also wanted in West Virginia for manslaughter and was found guilty for that. Somehow, I don't think life was enough. He took away friendships, and you might as well say 2 lives. Thank you for reading my story. Hope my story teaches someone never, never to coach your friend into anything dangerous. I think that goes without saying. I tried sharing this on my Reddit, but it did not get any traction at all because Reddit doesn't seem to like me, because I'm a direct person and don't put up with anybody's bullshit. I have never even posted on my wall or any subreddits, but I tend to tell people what they don't want to hear in the comments. I'm not rude, I just give direct advice, which some people don't like, I guess. I am what my friends call the guardian angel of the LGBTQ community. I seek out online bullies and cuss them out and then report them, and then they get banned or their profile gets some hard punishment. It all started in October of 2004 when I was a sophomore in college. I was becoming a veterinarian. I also worked a full-time job. I worked at an assisted living home, sort of like a nursing home. I was a nursing assistant. It didn't pay much, but I still lived at home and thankfully didn't have to pay for anything but food and my own expenses. Around the middle of January, I noticed this 2001 or 2002 teal blue two-door Chevy Cavalier everywhere. I knew the make and model because my mom had the exact same car. It was just black. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I just figured it was a different car. If you were around back then, you'll remember how popular these cars were. One morning on my way to school from work, it was about a 20-minute drive. This was around 2 weeks after noticing it. I noticed the same car following me on the freeway. I hadn't really noticed because I never was one to scan my surroundings. I realized on this day that this car was a regular sighting. I don't know why I didn't notice it before, and why now it was hitting me that this dude was following me. I mean, come on, the same car I'd been seeing was following me for 2 weeks. I can't explain it. I got the worst feeling in the pit of my stomach. Then in a flash, I hit the exit a few exits before the one I was supposed to take and swung a right at the last moment. A few people were honking at me because I was obviously in a dangerous position, but I didn't care. I kept looking at the road and the freeway, back and forth, to see the car slow down to almost a complete stop. As I got out of view of him, I saw a Speedway gas station, pulled in behind it, and sat for about 15 minutes. My heart was pounding. Tears were coming down my face. I couldn't control it. At the time, I had a cell phone, but it wasn't attached to my hip like smartphones are to everyone these days, and I had a habit of leaving it at home. And of course, on this day, I left it at home. I went into the gas station and got a couple packs of cigarettes and a coffee. With the change, I went to the payphone outside to call my mom. I was so shaken, I did not even want to drive home. I sat inside of the Waffle House that was across the street from the gas station, waiting for my mom and dad. Plus, that was one place I could still smoke and enjoy my coffee. I was still shaking 30 minutes later when my mom and dad showed up. I didn't even drive my car to the Waffle House. I had just walked across the street. My dad drove my car home, and my mom dropped me off at school, asking me what happened. To this day, I really couldn't explain the feeling I got when I saw that car. It made me sick, so my body knew something my mind didn't, about that man driving the car. I've had problems with PTSD from a traumatic childhood, from when I lived with my aunt for a year. It felt like I was having a panic attack, and all the stuff from when I suffered from PTSD came flooding back. Mom was having problems, and because of a loss in our immediate family, she sent me to live with my aunt. That's a different story for a different time. I guess the feeling of being followed and looking back at trauma I had suffered in my childhood, which involved a form of stalking, stirred up my PTSD. So I figured I was simply crazy, and that guy wasn't following me after all. Monday morning, I woke up because I didn't have work that night. I got up, made coffee, and then went outside for my couple morning cigarettes with the dogs. As I was sitting on the porch, I had this feeling of being watched. I looked around and didn't see anything. You couldn't see anything from the outside of our backyard because of the big plants and a lot of trees we had back there. We'll try to explain the screened-in porch. It is small, and because we didn't smoke in the house, it had a gas heater in it, and has casement windows that crank out from the left and right on different sides of the porch. They have screens in them so bugs don't come in. I live here now and still have the porch. The door is on the right side of the porch, which means it's not toward the backyard, but towards the side of the house where I can look out from the side and see the road out front, from above the wooden fence we have. When I let the dogs back in that morning, I looked out towards the road and behind a tree saw the front end of the blue Cavalier. I rushed the dogs in, locked the door, went into the house and locked that door. Then I ran to the front of the house and peeked out from the curtains and blinds, and that was the car. I freaked out again and ran up to get my mom and dad up. My dad ran down the stairs and went outside. I swear to you, as soon as my dad swung our front door open, that car turned on, made a U-turn, and squid out of there, leaving a black streak on the road. We called the cops, and they came and investigated, but they did nothing. Because, well, I guess having a stalker wasn't that important for them to continue the investigation, which lasted only a few minutes. I had a friend that lived about an hour away. I went to stay with her for about 6 months and decided to come home after that, because I was homesick. I have always been close with my mother, and she has had mental issues since losing my little brother. I felt like she needed me, and my dad had told me that she was not well since I had left because she didn't want me to be so far from her. Returning home was amazing. I missed everyone because I hadn't been back once since I left because I was afraid of being followed. A few months went by and there were no signs of this guy anywhere. So I felt relief because it had gone on for so long, and I honestly didn't think moving would help, but it did, I thought. About a year after moving back to my parents' house, I wanted to start dating. I had never been in a committed relationship before, just dates here and there, and I was ready. My friends set me up with a couple of failures, and I mean literal failures. One guy had been back and forth to prison a couple times. Another had been divorced 3 times and wasn't even 30 yet. Don't come after her, she is a good person, but hangs out with what I would call low-life individuals. Sorry for the judgment. I told her I didn't need her help anymore. I started working at a veterinarian clinic in July of 2006 after I graduated college to start my career. I loved it. I made damn good money and finally got my own place. I thought I would try dating myself again instead of with help. There was this guy I'd always thought was really cute at my doctor's office. I had been going there since I was 18, and he was the receptionist that worked up front and checked everyone in. He would always flirt with me, but the only reason I never went for him was because he was easily 10 years older than me. It doesn't matter, I just didn't know how I felt about that. I had a doctor's appointment one day and told myself that I was going to ask him on a date. I got there and bitched out the first time, but on my way out I asked him. I was so nervous, but to my surprise, he said yes. We went on our first date a couple weeks later, which was around August of 2006. He was a catch. I fell in love with him on our first date. I know it's cliche, but I knew he was the one. Well, at least I thought. We did not move too fast. In fact, I was told by a couple of different people we weren't moving fast enough. We had been together for almost 2 years when we finally moved in together in June of 2008. Living together was fun. We did everything together. We took trips, went to amusement parks, tried different foods, and did wine tastings, and loved going to art museums. We got married on February 19th, 2012, which was my 30th birthday. It was completely planned. I had planned this wedding for 2 years after getting engaged. We moved into my dream home that summer, and I thought it could not get any better. We had a vacation planned for the summer of 2014 when I found out. One day I took off because I was taking care of a sick Pomeranian that a lady had brought into work and said she didn't want, and my boss let me off. We had had a dog that passed away a year prior, me and my husband, and I was looking for her leash because our dog was the same size as Susie, the Pomeranian. My ex-husband and I had separate walk-in closets in our bedroom. I was looking and went into his and couldn't figure out where this leash was, so I saw a box on the very top shelf of his closet and went and got this step stool out of the laundry room. I got up there and looked in this box. I got down, and it was full of pictures and a couple of DVDs. I'm looking through this box of pictures, not remembering these pictures of me that were taken, and I ran across him standing there right beside the exact same car that used to follow me, and thought it was him. Dropped the box of pictures and hit the ground like a cement brick. He had taken pictures of me sleeping and in the shower, amongst other things. I cried for a couple of hours looking through these pictures, and then I put the DVD into the player, and it showed all kinds of videos of me at the beach, and videos that I can't even talk about on here, and at the park, and just hours of footage of me not knowing I was being filmed. FYI, some of these were done before we even got together. There were so many photos, it was insane. It was an entire shoebox filled to the top of nothing but pictures with 2 DVDs and paper sleeves. I called my mom and she came over and we talked about it. She told me to call the police, so I did. But I had no idea what to say or what to do. I had been with this man for so long. I thought I knew everything there was to know about him. To this day, I cannot even believe I was married to this man. I slept with him. How did I not know that he was a creep? I always go back to that feeling I had in my car when he was following me. I remember how terrified I was and how much I was shaking. I've blamed myself for this for years. I have been in therapy since our divorce, which was finalized in 2015, and he didn't do much time, but I was shocked that he actually even got any time. After it was all said and done, he got 12 years in prison because of the DVDs and pictures, the ones I couldn't explain to you. He got out on November 28th, 2023 for good behavior, which was about a month ago. This infuriated me more than anything, like most of the laws in this country do. But to be fair, he was only charged for a felony and several misdemeanors. I don't want to share what those are. I guess the reason I shared this story was because I need people to know that you never actually know anyone in your life at all. No matter how much you think you know about your significant other, you may only know a little bit. So I really, really want to stress to you all, keep an eye on your significant other. I'm fine now. I got remarried in 2019. But it didn't last. We got divorced after COVID. But I got remarried last summer, and he is a nice man. I love him. I love this guy, and have shared all my past with him, but something he doesn't know is I came into our relationship expecting anything, and that's not a good thing. Because of my stalker ex-husband, I will never truly trust my husband, or any other man, 100%, and I know not everybody's going to like hearing that, but I can't help it. I never did have nor want to have children. It is just not something I have ever wanted. I don't even like children. But for a while I thought, what if I had ever had children with this man? I do not know what I would have done. Thank goodness I didn't. I'm still a veterinarian. I own my own clinic and have for years. I'm doing good and getting better every day. Thank you for taking the time to read my email. I hope you share, and I may share another story about my childhood one day, because that's a whole nother story. But until next time, Patricia. For a little bit of background, I'm a 24-year-old female who loves scary stories, horror movies, true crime, etc. It takes a lot to scare me, though I haven't actually experienced many terrifying, life-threatening events, fortunately. On to the story. This was during the middle of August in North Texas in the summer of 2023, so the nighttime temperatures were around 100 degrees. My dad and one of my brothers, who's 11, drove an hour north into the countryside to go stargazing for my brother's Scout Merit badge. There are some twisty gravel roads in the forest as you approach Black Creek Lake. We got to see a coyote, a deer, and 2 raccoons. We live in a city, so we don't often see such animals. We thought that'd be our excitement for the night. We then finally made it to the recreational park grounds beside the lake. The layout is simple. If you're standing in the round parking lot, then the campgrounds are to the north and west. The lake is south, and the path in and out is east of us. There are no official campgrounds east of this recreational area, which is important for later. We got there around 10 p.m. and set up. We were able to successfully see some stars through my telescope as well as Saturn, which was exciting for us. Throughout this whole time, though, there were 2 parties, or what might have been one group in the parking lot and surrounding nearby area. One party was kayaking, and then the other party was fishing from the boat ramp area west of us. To the north in the lot were 2 cars. From that direction we were constantly hearing a loud, irritating voice of a woman who was obviously in a bad mood and didn't want to be there. She continuously cursed at someone or no one in particular, and at one point was mad at someone for taking her keys and obstructing her from driving, which obviously made it sound like she was drunk or under some other influence. At one point in the night, around 11 p.m., we hear someone loudly, sporadically honk one of the car horns over and over in random patterns, and then we hear the obnoxious woman rudely tell someone to wake up over and over again, then proceeds to hold down on the horn for a few seconds at a time, and continue her assault on the horn and our ears. By this point, my family and I are just about ready to leave due to the loud commotion. I personally was fixing to go over there myself and tell her off, but I knew that probably wasn't the best idea. I definitely didn't want to put myself and my unborn baby in danger. Then for about 20 to 30 minutes we were able to watch the stars in relative peace with little noise coming from the other 2 parties. Fortunately, none of these people were directly involved with what happened next, but it may have been the cause of it. Just before midnight, we packed up our stargazing stuff and got in the car. Now, the gravel path to the exit is up a slight hill or slope, meaning from the parking lot you can't see past where the path goes up and around a couple trees. We drive up the hill, and just as the headlights came back down to illuminate the path in front of us and the trees to our right side, it was right then and there that we see a man wearing only black shorts and no shirt. The timing was straight out of a horror movie. To just suddenly see someone out of nowhere. He was in his late 20s or 30s and had short dark hair. Just as the light hit him, he was standing and walking right there, just to the right of our car, in front of us at a very close distance, only a couple of feet away. The guy had been walking towards our direction, and upon seeing us, quickly raised both of his arms to flip us both off with both hands. He keeps his hands and arms raised and is quickly loudly saying something to us with anger or something in his voice. We couldn't understand what he was saying, though, since we had the radio on and all this was happening quickly. The second the man saw us, he started walking towards our car faster. My dad was driving slowly initially to avoid the agitated man, thinking he might need help. My dad, in a confused voice, says, "What is he doing?" But I just reply with, "Nope, go, go, go," and we sped off. I knew that this was not a situation where we needed to stick around and ask questions. It freaked me out a little imagining what would have happened if the guy had reached the car a few seconds later if we hadn't sped off. I'm not very familiar with my dad's car, and it scared me to think that I might have ended up pressing the wrong button to lock my door, and the guy could have opened it and done who knows what. We left and never had anything else happen, but we did wonder who the guy was and where he came from. The direction he was walking from had no official campgrounds, only the forest. Maybe he lived in one of the scattered houses in the woods we'd passed on our long journey. I wondered why he had been walking in our direction toward the recreational area. My best theory is that he wanted to confront the group that had been honking the horn and waking up the entire forest, but upon seeing our car leave, maybe he thought it had been us making the racket. Even if that's not it, or the man needed help, which is not likely considering his reaction to us, I couldn't help but feel a sense of danger. I hope that no harm came to those other two parties that night. Before I start, I must say I haven't told many people this, mostly because it's a very scary experience for me. This happened in Kelowna, Canada in the 1980s. I was about 14. I was babysitting at a neighbor's house while the parents were gone. They had a nice house like most in the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner where two streets connected. My house was right outside a bus stop across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night in the winter time, so it was dark out, maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on the couch when I thought I saw something out of the back door. It was one of those glass doors that led to a porch. It was weird though because I couldn't see much. You know when the lights are on and it's dark out so you can't see anything but black and your reflection? That's what I saw. But I could have sworn it looked like something was there. So I got up and walked close to the window. It definitely looked like something was there, but I still couldn't see. I got closer, still couldn't see. Honestly, should have just turned on the lights, but instead I put my face right to the glass and cupped my hands by my eyes to look out. Maybe about 1 inch from my face on the other side of the glass was a man. He looked tall and pale from what I could see, which wasn't much, and he was staring at me very scarily. Keep in mind, he would have been watching from the backyard. Naturally, I jumped back and let out a short scream, but stupid teenage me didn't call the cops. I called my parents instead. My father came over to take a look. There were still footprints in front of the backyard. I don't remember much after that because it just felt like a very unreal experience. You never expect this stuff to happen to you until it does. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the story because I sure didn't enjoy the experience. When I finished university, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by James, who had a room for rent on the outskirts of the town I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. We had a chat one evening, and it turned out we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. By the end of the call, it had felt like chatting with an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed he was in his 20s like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he'd told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I'd already decided I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also put off by the house decor, which looked like it hadn't been changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a game console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name is Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother who lived next door. Then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said I had some other properties to view but would be in touch. I then made my excuses to leave. Everything about him screamed red flag. I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I got back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was and I absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I'd thought any more about moving in. I lied and said I'd found somewhere closer to town. I did eventually find something with some other young professionals, which turned out to be great. Some months later, our town was shocked by the news that a man's body had been found in the field on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of that until I saw a murder suspect was his landlord, James, the same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. Hi guys, second time posting this on Reddit because it got deleted. I hope this is the right subreddit. Sorry for the bad English. This happened in 2022. To give you a bit of context, my brother and I have just moved to Los Angeles. He was 17 and I was 18. We moved to the US without our parents, seeking a better future since we came from an unstable country, and we were the only ones with papers. An acquaintance of our parents who owned properties in the area gave us temporary housing in one of the houses he was renovating. It was in Hawthorne. My brother and I, being innocent, didn't realize that the area wasn't safe. It was common to see homeless people and drug addicts, but we didn't give it much importance. I worked full-time every day to pay for rent and food, and also studied in my free time, so I didn't have much time to myself. My brother, on the other hand, was underage, so he couldn't do much about it. The acquaintance of our parents visited us from time to time, took us out for walks, and it was tough, but at the same time, he advised us a lot to face our situation in the best way possible. One night, my brother woke me up at 3 a.m. scared, saying he heard noises coming from the living room. Me being tired from work and also having to wake up early the next day told him not to bother me. He kept insisting until I heard something break. Immediately, I told my brother to lock the door and call the police. We were both scared, but I had to appear confident to not scare him more. We thought maybe it was Marco, the acquaintance of my parents. But it wouldn't make sense. Why would he be here at 3 a.m.? He would have told us he was coming. Then we heard footsteps approaching our room. The officer asked us many questions over the phone, asked about the place, how many rooms it had, etc. Then we saw from the window 6 police officers armed with ARs. The officer on the phone asked us if we'd left the front door open, and we told her no. She replied, "Well, it's open." The cops cleared all the rooms and escorted us outside. After a while, they confirmed that there was no one inside. After the scare, the officers asked us even more questions. We cooperated as much as we could. Suddenly, we heard a woman scream from one of the houses across the street. It was a scream like I had never heard before, of absolute terror. The officers quickly went to check and sent us inside. We secured everything, and talking with my brother, he told me the reason he was awake was because that night his girlfriend had cheated on him with his best friend and he couldn't sleep. Indirectly, thanks to her, we were able to act quickly and avoid a worse situation. Thanks to the infidelity, my brother and I are still alive and didn't get unalived in our sleep. That night I didn't sleep at all, and to this day I double check if the doors and windows are locked. The next day we found out that person had stolen our food, toaster, and laptop. Then we noticed a dirty, disgusting water bottle on the table. We knew that it belonged to the intruder. To this day we have no idea who it was, or what happened with the lady across the street, but seeing that there were no cops the next day, or no crime scene, maybe she probably ran this guy off, or it was an unlinked situation. That would be a lot more disturbing. The cops never gave us any more detail and told us to be careful. My brother and I are currently happy and a lot more safe now that our family is reunited. We use this incident as a reminder to never ever let our guards down, and we sometimes laugh about the amount of luck we had. Never thought I'd be so grateful that my brother got cheated on. Stay safe. I take a walk every morning as part of my waking up routine. This morning, towards the beginning of my walk, I pass a man who asks me something. He's slightly too close to me, but not enough to make me uncomfortable. Just enough that I don't want to slow down or have to listen to what he has to say. I have my earphones in as well, and I don't take them out, but hear enough that he asks me for the time. Without breaking my stride, I glance at my watch, say 7:30, and keep walking. If he said anything else, I didn't hear. About 20 minutes to a half hour later, well far from the first time I came across this guy, that same guy walks up from behind me and asks again and again, too close to me, for the time. I tell him at that point to get away from me, stop following me, and that I already gave him the time. That escalates things immediately because he shoots back, "Why, is it because I'm black?" I respond, "No, it's because you approached me about a mile away with the same question." He says he lives in the neighborhood, so I say fine, but please stop following me. He denies following me, calls me a racial slur and then the B word as I cross the street to put more distance between us. This guy follows me across the street and keeps following me as I cross back over. At this point, I'm yelling for him to get away from me and stop following me, and he's repeating the same lines about being black and hurling racial slurs at me at the same time. I'm getting worried while there are people out at 8 a.m., either walking their kids to school or going to work. No one's going to step up because of a bystander effect. After I cross the street for a second time, he gets right in my face yelling about how he's not following me. I have my back against an apartment complex, and am getting worried that things are going to get physical when a tall woman with pink hair walks up. I don't remember what she said, but at some point confirms to her that he wasn't leaving me alone. She's about the same height as this guy and starts to yell for him to stop following me. He is now being badgered by her, and he's also yelling back the same denials about not following me, being from the neighborhood, and accusing that this is all because he's black. Thanks to my lady savior, I'm able to break away. A couple that was exiting their apartment who witnessed all of this asks if I'm alright, which I say yes without stopping. I walk half a neighborhood block down to duck through an alley. As I'm walking down the alley, checking the entire time to make sure that guy's not following me, I see the woman with the pink hair has disengaged and is walking off. I'm so glad it didn't escalate for her, and I feel bad for not being able to thank her for her help. I take a circuitous route home, looking behind my shoulders every once in a while. People will hate me for this, but it is something I have held in for years and need to tell someone. I've been in therapy for 4 years and still haven't told my therapist this. I married my second husband in 1988. I was 22 and my parents lived thousands of miles away because the guy I had just married was on base in the state I still lived in. I didn't realize my husband had a temper while we were together. I mean, he and I never even got in an argument while we were together. 2 weeks after we got married, he hit me for the first time. I didn't tell anyone because I thought it was a one-time thing. Then I just thought that the reason he hit me was because I didn't cook, and maybe I should have. Even though I was raised to defend myself, and if I called my dad, I knew he would probably off him. I kept it a secret and tried not making him mad. It worked. He didn't hit me for a couple of more months. The second time I came home late after hanging out with friends. I had a curfew that was 7 o'clock and it was 10 after 10 when I walked into the house. I figured I could explain because my friends had picked me up and had an emergency, so I just went with her. As soon as I was closing the door and barely turned around, I woke up. He had knocked me out as soon as I came in the door. I woke up with an overly swollen face and bruises all over my stomach, chest, and legs. I had to go to the hospital. He broke a lot of stuff, but I don't want to get to the gory stuff on here. I left him when I got home. I flew to my mom and dad's and filed for divorce a couple of days later. Crazy thing is, I had my brand new car and a lot of clothes and other stuff there, and I knew I had to go back before I left. I ended up leaving anyway, and a couple months later, my brother, dad, and I flew down there to get the rest of my stuff and my car because after we got married, my now ex-husband cut my driver's license up and told me I was grounded from driving for 6 months. That's because I came home late from the store one night. When we arrived, he wasn't home, which was ordered by the court because I had a restraining order. Oh yeah. He stalked me at my parents' after I filed for divorce. We caught him on my parents' security cameras. A cop was with us. While going through my stuff, I found a note before I tell you that John, my second husband, had 3 kids. John was 12 years older than me and had been married and divorced twice before. Anyway, the note read, "Why didn't you come back for us? We waited. Why did you lie?" I cried reading that. You see, John ran the house like his own military base and worked his kids to the brink. If they didn't do what he said or got tired before they were done, he would make them sit their knees in rice for an hour, and it was horrifying. It isn't like I didn't do anything about it. I talked to my divorce lawyer and she did what she could do, but they couldn't prove any of it. Honestly, I don't know how because those kids had scars from the rice on their knees. You literally could see permanent imprints of rice on their legs. And those cops had the nerve to say that there was no evidence of abuse. My first husband and I still talked, so his mother worked as a social worker and I asked her what I should do. And the only thing she did was make a call to the police. They went to his house, but I guess the kids didn't get taken. On my way home, I stopped by their mother's house where they lived, most of the time with her and most of the time with her dad. I talked to them. I gave them my number and told them to call if it got worse. They never did call. 2 weeks ago, the youngest, whom was 2 when I married John, took his own life. And I'm pretty tore up about it. He was 38, and I know he had to have been treated badly, and I wish I could have done more. After he moved out of his dad's when he was 18, he took up drinking and drugs, and that's where it all went downhill. I ran into him about 10 years ago, and I had known from a friend that he had started using after he turned 18. It was obvious that his dad destroyed him. My family have 3 beautiful kids, and that is because I was lucky enough to get remarried. I could have done more, I feel. I still feel guilty. I still have guilt, and my family tells me I shouldn't, but I can't help but feel at fault for their life. I married again a few years later after our divorce also, and we are still together. He treats me like an angel. I feel bad I couldn't have brought them with me so that they'd have a better life. Okay, so this just happened a few days ago when I was on a road trip with my cousin. I'll be referring to him again as James like I have in past stories. For a quick reference, I'm 13 and female. James is 21. James and I were on a road trip from my grandmother's to my aunt's house. I have a great relationship with my cousin, so my parents let me go on trips with him occasionally. It's about a 10-hour drive, and we were about 3 hours into the drive. It was about 9 p.m. at the time. I was pretty sleep deprived and everything was hilarious at that moment, so when I saw this red semi-truck outside my window, I just laughed my ass off. The man in the truck was heavy-set and had a long untamed beard. He had a creepy vibe, but I waved to them. He, in turn, did a groping motion to me. Finding it more hilarious than creepy, I started laughing harder and told James the story, doing the whole groping motion and all. He looked creeped out and disgusted, but there wasn't anything either of us could do. A while later, about 4.5 hours into our drive, James pulled into a rest stop. I walked into the bathroom, and when I came out, the man was just standing there. He looked about 6 foot at least. I looked out the glass door leading into the building and saw James glaring daggers at the door. I was confused and walked back to the car. What he told me really creeped me out so much I started crying. Then again, I had been awake for around 20 hours. The man had stared and followed me inside to the building, mumbling stuff about me. James said he was basically talking normal. He attempted to confront me, but quickly said he had to go to the bathroom and went inside. A few seconds later, when I was in the car, the guy was at my window. He started saying I should go with him. He was going to treat me good. He offered me candy and tried to coax me into his truck. I was busy bawling my eyes out. Then, right on cue, James walks out and yells at the guy and threatens him. The guy backed off and got into his truck. He still just stared at me, the grin still on his face. We floored it out of there. We wanted to get as far from that guy as possible. It was around 12 a.m. when we pulled into a motel to get some sleep. The rest of the night, until 8 a.m., was fine. Nothing really happened. Sadly, that didn't last long. When we were at a restaurant eating breakfast, the same guy sat across from us. He grinned at me and James looked pissed off. The guy walked by the table when going to the bathroom and brushed his hand on my shoulder, doing the same thing on the way back. A quick note. James is a chill dude and will let most of anything slide, but because he's known me since I was just a baby, he's protective over me. He's not like that to even my siblings. He and I are close. He was obviously pissed before, but at this point he stood up from his seat and walked over to the guy's table. He started yelling crap about he better stop following us and back off of me. He made no threats, but he did curse a lot. I felt pretty nervous and just wanted to go. The guy stood up and smacked James and yelled how I was leading him on. The guy was 6 foot and James was 6'8". Their argument continued until the cops came and separated it. They got the story and came to the conclusion that because he was assaulted, we could press charges. He said no, and we just continued the day. The rest of the trip was pretty bland. The guy wasn't seen for the rest of it. However, James did follow me like a bodyguard wherever we went. Even though he was protecting me, I was terrified. He looked so scary, but he's a cinnamon roll. Also on the trip, I tried to ask him about what happened when I was 7. It was another story I posted before, and he just played dumb. Boy wouldn't tell me nothing. Anyway, hope you enjoyed reading this. Anyone who wants to narrate it can. Just send me a link when you do. Bye-bye. I should mention that I previously lived in a tiny town, but went to high school in a considerably larger city. I never had a reason or the nerve to go out of the city on my own, so when my two friends wanted to hang around town, I was nervous to say the least. However, I thought, hey, what the hell, I'll be with them. We had a blast for a couple of hours after school, with some small scary incidents along the way, including walking through a store full of expensive statues and gemstones with a massive backpack protruding from my back, and the original restaurant we wanted to go to was closed, forcing us to Subway. However, as it got dark, we all knew we had to go home, so we all enjoyed one last store and went our separate ways. I waited outside the store, alone, in the dark, not terribly afraid yet. I had told my mother where to find me, but she was hopeless with directions, so I had expected to be hanging around there for a while. I noticed a news camera stationed outside the store, which made me feel even safer. But about 10 minutes into the wait, I was approached by two men. My memory is fuzzy due to how freaked I was, but this was what I remember. Hey, do you know where name of town that I can't remember is? I shook my head. I was already nervous because I'm a paranoid person on the best of days, and this was not turning out to be the best of days. Oh, come on, one man coaxed. Listen, we'll give you a bag of jewelry if you help us, the other man said. Now I was genuinely freaking out. I glanced around and noticed the news camera and stepped a little closer to the line of sight of the lens, not enough to make them notice. Listen, I stammered, trying really hard not to stammer or show how freaked I was. I think it's that way. I don't need anything, I said, pointing in a random ass direction. They glanced in the direction of my finger. They glanced back. Can you show us? Again, we have a bag of jewelry. It felt as if my heart leaped out of my throat. No, thank you, and my mom is coming to get me, I declined as calmly as I could. They stared at me for a few seconds, then nodded, thanking me and heading off in the direction I pointed at. I kept well in the line of sight of the news camera until my mother picked me up. I didn't fully relax for a full week. I have absolutely no idea why they were so eager to give me a bag of jewelry. My thought was that they stole it and wanted to throw the police off their trail by handing it to someone like me. The second was that they were trying to lure me away with jewelry. Either way, it wouldn't have ended well for me, if that was the goal. No one believed me, but I didn't expect them to, really. I have never felt comfortable in the city alone in the dark ever since, even though it's been 2 years and I now live in a decently sized city for college. I don't remember exactly when this was. I'm pretty sure it was around March of 2018. I was 12 years old and in 7th grade. I often listened to and read scary stories online about things like sleep paralysis, but I never thought it would happen to me. Before I woke up, I was having a strange dream. I was playing Counter-Strike, but it felt like I wasn't playing, and it was real. I was shooting some targets and then I blacked out for a second. I woke up on the main road that goes into my neighborhood and saw that the road was gone. The houses on my street were very small too, like two-story box houses. There were elderly people standing in front of the houses all reading newspapers, and the sign at the front of my neighborhood only read Brook G, with the rest crumbling off. I then appeared at my morning bus stop for school looking at my phone. Everything was normal until a bush, that normally isn't there, screamed at me. I remember clearly feeling as though this was normal, so I screamed back. We went back and forth until I woke up with this scream echoing in my ears. I was in my bed looking against the wall, unable to move. I hadn't realized that I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but I was still freaked out by that screaming to fall back asleep. I lie there not hearing anything for about 5 minutes. I then heard what sounded like heavy boots hitting the ground outside of my living room, coming towards my bedroom area. Just so you know, outside of my bedroom there is a hallway. On the left is a bathroom, at the end is my parents' room, and at the end on the right is a door that goes to my living room. The footsteps grew closer, coming to the hallway and then to my parents' room. At that moment, I remember my dad was out of town on a business trip, so it was just me, my mom, and my 7-year-old brother. I heard the walking start up again and come towards my room. The door opened, and whatever was out there came in, walked to the side of my bed, and stared at me. I closed my eyes and began to pray. I'm not really religious, but it's the only thing that I can think to do. After what felt like hours, I tried to turn over to look to see if anyone was there. I rolled over with my eyes still closed to appear to anyone that was there that I'm asleep. I opened my eyes and began to squint. The coast was clear. I crawled out of my bed slowly and looked at the clock. It read 4:14 a.m. Dang it, I got school tomorrow, I thought. I tiptoed over to my door and grabbed a decorative oar that my mom had put on the wall in my room. I walked out into the hallway. The light in our living room was on, and the door was open with the light on, which wasn't normal, especially when my dad was out of town. I checked the bathroom and peeked around the corner of the door. Nobody, so I made a silent sprint into my mom's room, putting the oar down on the floor. I shake her awake, quietly whispering her name. Mom, I think there's someone in the house. I heard walking around outside my room and I began to tear up, realizing this all may have been for nothing and all in my head. I woke up my mom for nothing. It's alright, my name. We can go check the house real quick. I grabbed the oar and we went to go check the house with my mother. There was nobody in our house, so I went back to bed, relieved that we were safe and that none of that was real. I haven't had a sleep paralysis experience since and am glad it wasn't worse. The story seems like nothing compared to some of the other stories about it that I've heard, but I hope you enjoy reading it. This happened many years ago, but I thought I would share. Considering Reddit removed my story from 3 different communities, I have never figured out where to post it, so I thought I would share with you, even though your YouTube channel is new. Everyone's got to start somewhere though, right? My name is Marcus. I'm a 29-year-old male and I live up north in Canada. Before I start, I want to preface that I am not a psychic, do not consider myself a psychic, and this has only happened once in my life. I was 15 and was in the stage where I could not stand my parents. I mean, everything they did made me mad. Not sure why, but now I can't get enough of them. We are really close. On to the story. I went to bed one night and had this dream that my dad was at a restaurant with this red-headed woman. I couldn't see her face for some reason, but I could see my dad's. It was the realest dream I had ever had and have had since. It was like watching TV, but I was the camera and saw everything. My dad then paid for their meal and drinks and asked this woman if she wanted to go back to his room, and she responded with yes. They go up to his room and the door closes right in my, I guess you'd call it, dream face. I stood outside of the door hearing everything. I then ran into a friend from school out of nowhere. He was just walking down the hall in the hotel. Hey, did you finally catch them? He asked. Dream Me then said, yeah, I can't wait to tell Mom. My dream dad then came out and, in no shock at all, asked if we could be quiet. I woke up the next morning completely baffled. I had to sit at the end of the bed for like 10 minutes trying to get my thoughts together. Although I woke up knowing it was a dream and knowing it couldn't possibly be true, I gave my dad the cold shoulder all day and couldn't get the dream out of my head. One thing I couldn't quit thinking about was why my friend that was in my dream asked me if I caught them yet, like I had been waiting to catch them or something. I had never even suspected my dad of having an affair on my mom. Well, I soon found out. I told Mason about the dream. He was the one that was in it and asked if I caught them yet. The reason I asked is because I was wondering if it was possible if he maybe had the same dream as I did. I was telling him about the story and he seemed a little shocked and then said that he'd had a dream similar to mine, but it was just a dream. He also asked if I really thought it would come true, and I told him I didn't know. As the weeks wore on, I forgot about the dream. Fast forward about a year and a half. I'm 16 at the time, and am in a relationship with a girl I'd known since middle school. Her and I had gotten some burgers and pop and just sat in the car in front of her house when my mom texts me, asking if I've seen my dad. I said no, and knew something was wrong. See, years earlier, before I was born, My dad had an affair with my mom's sister, and one of the rules for her taking him back is that he is not allowed to leave the house without telling her where he's going. This was a vice versa deal. Another rule was that he has to call if he's going to be late. I know these are ridiculous rules, but he followed them for 15 years. I drove home after Misty, my then girlfriend, got out. When I got home, my mom was at the kitchen table crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she responded with, "He left me." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She said, "I looked in his dresser after I texted you. It was empty, and it had a note in it saying he was leaving me and that he can't stand me anymore." She handed me the note, and it was bad. Anyway, my mom had gotten a job at a hotel a couple of months after my dad left, and I even got hired on as a janitor. I know, but I needed the money. One night I was cleaning one of the hallways outside of the rooms and saw my dad coming my way. He hadn't seen me yet, but he was with a tall redhead, and I quickly turned around. When I heard the door shut, I leaned back on the wall and slid down in shock. I knew Dad had been having an affair, and knew that is why he left Mom. He didn't tell me, and I didn't have proof of it. I just knew. Something told me. And then to see my dream come true right in front of my very eyes, it was so eerie and scary. Mom and Dad eventually were divorced. My mom is happier now and has had a new husband for several years now. He makes her so happy. He is a really nice guy. I haven't forgiven my dad yet and don't know if I ever will. We aren't close at all. Put it this way, it is May 30th, 2024, and I haven't talked to my dad since Thanksgiving of 2018 at all. I only know he's still alive because my sisters haven't said anything. Anyway, I have been married for 6 years, and my life goal is not to be my dad. My newborn son, my first child, was born 2 weeks ago, and that is what made me write this story. Thank you for sharing. My life has been all over the place until last year, and I wanted to share my love for life now and why it went from deciding to end it all to deciding something even better. My name is Sarah. I'm a 49-year-old female, and I work as a nurse in a doctor's office. I didn't have the most exciting childhood. I was raised in Texas and in a very conservative, judgmental household. Basically, I was raised to believe all Christians are good, and if you aren't a Christian, you're going to hell. Also, my parents committed I don't know how many sins, and I would ask them why, and they'd say, "Well, I asked for forgiveness, so it's fine," which was BS in my head. I didn't know how dirty Christians could be until I was a teenager. We'll start from the beginning. When I was 17, I got pregnant. My parents didn't tell us anything. Believe it or not, I didn't even know you could get pregnant from sex. My parents seriously told us that all babies came from the hospital, and you would swallow a pill, and the parents would kiss, and that is how babies were made. And I thought this until I was 19 years old. My parents were beside themselves, to say the least, when I got pregnant. They decided I would have the baby, and we'd go from there. And because we went to a Christian school, they backed my parents up. You know, lie after lie after lie. After the baby was born, my parents reminded me it would be better that they raise her as their own, and I would be the baby's sister. I did not like this idea, but of course the preacher suggested it, so I didn't have a choice. I signed my daughter over to my parents. If I could go back, I would. Had I known what I know now, which is I didn't have to give my baby up at all, but it is amazing what they lie to you about in Christian school. The preacher told me legally, since I was underage, all girls who got pregnant had to give the babies up to their parents. When I turned 18, I swallowed my fear and left. I couldn't stay there with my daughter right across the hall from me. I moved to Tallahassee when I was 18 and got married, had 3 children, got divorced, married again, and divorced again. And at 25, after all that, I went home for the first time since I left. I hadn't even called in 7 years. I didn't know who was dead or alive or if anyone had moved. I just packed up my kiddos and moved back to my home state. At that point, I didn't know if I was going to stay permanently, so I planned on bringing Emma, my daughter, back with me. I got home and found out my parents, along with my daughter, had moved to a 2-bedroom house since all my siblings but Emma were grown. I went to an aunt of mine's house who I had kept in contact with and asked her if she knew where they lived, because surprisingly, she never told me they moved. She told me she knew but didn't want to tell me because we never talked about them during our Sunday conversations, and she didn't want to upset me. It made sense. She told me also, had she known I was coming, she would have said something. I went ahead and stayed at my aunt's for a year and got a job, saved money, and got a 3-bedroom house. I still had not talked to my parents at all since I'd been back. I ended up deciding to wait until my daughter was 18 to tell her. A few years later, and one more divorce later, I decided to move back to Tallahassee so I could try and start over there. My aunt had passed away, and I had no one left there in Texas. My siblings and I weren't close because, like I said, I hadn't talked to anyone since I was 18. I even avoided going to my aunt's funeral to not see my parents. Fast forward to last year, I was newly divorced after being married for 16 years, and I really wanted my daughter in my life. By this point, I had had a relationship with her since she was 18, and she lived, and still lives, right beside me. One night I decided to write her a letter. It was a hot summer night, and I remember reading a book about a woman who'd given her daughter up to her parents, and as I had tears in my eyes, I decided to write her a letter knowing very well it could turn out bad. I held the letter in my hand, the ink still wet from the pen. The words flowed from my heart, a story that had been buried deep within my soul for decades. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and a secret that had shaped my entire life. My dearest Emma, as I write this, my hands tremble with the weight of the truth I have carried for so long. You have always known me as your older sister, but today I must reveal the reality that has haunted me. You are not my sister, Emma. You are my daughter. I was only 17 when I found out I was pregnant. Our parents, strict and traditional, would never have accepted such a scandal. I was terrified and alone, with no one to turn to. Our mother, with a heart as cold as the winter winds, made the decision for me. She would raise you as her own, and I would be your sister. I remember the day you were born, a stormy night that mirrored the turmoil in my heart. When I held you for the first time, your tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I felt a love so fierce it nearly broke me. But I also knew I had to let you go, to allow you to grow up in a world where you were loved and accepted without the stigma of my youthful indiscretion. I'm so sorry I told you this way. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner or take you with me when I left at 18. All the things I regret, lying to you is the biggest regret I have. I'm so sorry for the pain my mother put you through. From what you have told me, I would have never left you there. Even though I knew she was mean and old, like a witch, I thought she would never hurt you. I love you, Emma, and if this changes the way you feel about me, or if it changes our friendship, I'm so terribly sorry. I just feel you should have known. The reason, the real reason I didn't tell you is because I was afraid of Mom, and since it has been 6 months since she died, I felt now was the best time as any to tell you. I love you with everything in me and hope we can move on from here. If you want, we will talk more about it after you read this. Sincerely with love, Mom or Sarah. I took the letter and put it in her mailbox. If you think it turned out good, it didn't. At first. A few hours later, she came to my door pounding on it. I answer. "What the hell?" she screams. "Are you fucking serious?" With tears starting to well up in my eyes, I say, "Yes." She told me she hated me and never wanted to speak to me again. Obviously, I didn't tell her the whole story, about her dad and stuff. When I was in high school, I was essayed by a senior football player, and that's how I got pregnant. I didn't want to tell her because he did go to jail for it. I just didn't want to relive the trial again, even with writing it down because it's a long, long story. But I knew I had to share it because I didn't want her to know she is half of a rapist's daughter. That doesn't bother me. I still love her and have never hated her. I guess it's because she looks nothing like him and more like me. She stormed out of the door before I could say anything else. 6 months went by, and while she still lived next door, she hadn't talked to me since. Because of this, I started drinking heavily when my other kids were at school or in bed, and one night I felt so low I decided to take my own life. I did this with pills. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. This is where I know people will get judgy, and if you haven't experienced depression along with extreme anxiety, you have no room to talk. My youngest son, who was 14 at the time, had heard me crying in my room and checked on me, and that is when he found me. I regret so much that I did this. I was in such a bad place, but I also regret my son finding me. When I woke up, Emma was sitting in the chair next to me, asleep, with a book lying on her chest. All I could do was silently cry while staring at my daughter. My daughter. I love those words. She is my daughter. I will try to shorten it up here. When she woke up, I told her everything, and I mean everything. I told her about her sperm donor dad and the extent of the abuse that went on in the house when I was a child. It's been a year since then, and we are closer than ever before. Thank you for reading my story. I live in a fairly secure area and have two dogs. One is a large Doberman, and the other is a poodle. I was home alone as my parents were out for the weekend. Our dogs bark a lot as they are protective, and the neighbors hate when the dogs bark. We often get notes telling us to keep the dogs quiet. One of the more threatening neighbors would hurt the dog if it wouldn't be quiet, so my parents have them taken to a dog kennel to avoid any complications. I was home alone playing video games and watching movies for the weekend. It was the night after they had left, and I was playing a video game, and I think it was Rainbow Six Siege. I was playing with a few friends, and I had my microphone on. I was playing with my window open, and my friend kept telling me to stop making a squeaky sound. I questioned what he meant, and my friend said that there was a loud banging. I removed my headphones, and that is when I heard the sound of something slamming into the gate. I peered out. It was a tall, stocky man with a black hood looking down, slamming his body into the fence as the fence was weak and the wood was splitting. I decided to call the police rather than my parents, but decided to stay near the window. Still watching the man, I was talking to the 911 operator. The operator told me to lock myself in a room, get out of sight, and that the police officer was on the way. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to continue watching the man. He finally broke the wooden gate off its hinges, but he didn't enter. He strapped something around his shoulder, and upon further inspection, only from the moonlight, I saw a hunting rifle strapped to his back. That's when I went and hid underneath the bed and listened out for anything until a loud shatter broke the silence, which was the back door smashing, followed by the footsteps, and then I could tell he was entering the house. The intruder sounded like he was looking for something. He was creeping up the stairs until the sound of police sirens flooded my ears, and I made the stupid decision of bolting, trying to escape the house, and I started to get to the stairs and turned the corner and was greeted by a large man following the description of the man trying to break in. The man gripped my neck, the police sirens got louder, and then the police were knocking on the front door. I was quickly losing breath from the man strangling me. The cloth covering his face slipped down to reveal my neighbor. I was nearly out of breath. He let me go and gripped his rifle and aimed it at me, and then pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. The dumbass left the safety on. The police kicked the door down and tased the man. The man was charged with breaking and entering and carrying an unlicensed firearm. I'm thankful that the safety was on because this could have ended very badly. I later went to my Xbox and told my friends what happened and that I almost died. Okay, so this is my first official post here, but I have to share this story. It happened about 3 years ago. I live in the United States. I was a 6'1", 210-pound, 23-year-old white male college student that was living in a predominantly Hispanic low-income neighborhood when this occurred. About 5 minutes after my Pizza Hut shift one night, I decided to walk across the street to buy a couple tall boys at my local liquor store. Excited about it being the weekend and getting to sleep in the next morning. I know I had no life. So, as the cashier was handing me my bag of booze across the counter, a muffled yet short female scream reverberated throughout the store just from outside. I distinctly remember how pitiful it sounded. The cashier and I made that certain eye contact where you're both just like, what the heck? After a brief silence, he just shrugs his shoulders slowly and tells me to be careful getting home. I nod my head and start out after giving him a gracias from over my shoulder. I know it seems like we may have underreacted, but honestly, you see and hear a lot of crazy stuff in this city, especially at night. So in addition to not wanting to get mixed up in something, you don't just call the cops over anything, especially a random scream. Even with that being said, thinking about how pitiful it sounded gave me a mixture of disgusted anger and cold fear. My heart was speeding up at this point. I opened the liquor store door slightly and looked around outside. After hearing and seeing nothing but traffic for about 15 seconds, I decided to start walking home, head down, eyes and ears open. But as soon as I rounded the liquor store corner, I was greeted by an obviously intoxicated but somehow steady, short, stocky Hispanic man with a scratched up face and a really stretched out shirt. Assuming he was one of the few drunks that live in a small but dense patch of forest about 12 feet behind the store, I completely disregarded him and continued walking. At first, something about his behavior caught my attention. He looked extremely nervous, as if he were up to something. Also, I could hear a faint, almost non-existent gurgle-like sound coming from the trees. Immediately, I began to suspect he had something to do with the scream I'd heard just minutes before. Upon making eye contact, he caught on fast that I suspected him. "How are you?" he awkwardly asked me in Spanish, smiling way too much and motioning for me to follow him into the darkness behind the store. I pretty much told him to kick rocks and continued walking home at a much faster pace now, looking behind me every 16 or so steps. I began wondering what the hell that noise was coming from the woods and why that man was acting so shady. Maybe I was overreacting though. Maybe the sound was just an old pipe or drain nearby. Maybe he really was just drunk and didn't want me to call the cops on him for public intoxication or something. I now wish, with everything in me, I would have called the police then and there and gone in the store and waited. About 5 minutes later, while walking down the particularly dark and isolated stretch of road about a half a mile before my apartments, out of nowhere the man I had just seen burst through some shrubbery about 12 feet from me wielding a freaking machete. That's right, a machete. Honestly, you can't make this stuff up. I immediately went into panic mode and threw my beers at him and began to run as fast as my legs would carry me towards my apartment buildings, hoping I had enough strength left within me to make that walk. I now realized I should have ran back towards the store as it was closer, but as I stated, he came from behind me and the rest is instinct. He was initially so close behind me, I swear I could hear the blade cutting the air as he swung it at me from behind. I honestly expected a machete blow to the neck or head or anything else at any second. That's a very unique, very hard state of mind to be in, knowing that you could die at any moment. The worst, most gruesome thoughts of me being murdered began to fill my mind. Would I trip only to have a defensive arm hacked off right before my eyes, or would I be half decapitated mid-stride, falling hard and bleeding out as any other parts of my body were cut off. Tears began to fill my eyes as I thought of how my family would feel knowing I was hacked to death, bleeding out on the side of the dark road again. I began to scream, half out of desperation to live, the other half out of fear and not wanting to die such a horrible death. I know it sounds bitchy, but you can't really judge until you're being chased down with someone who literally wants to hack apart your body until you die. I'll try to shorten the story up a little now. Yes, I eventually made it home. Some part of me knew I'd lost the guy way before getting there, but my fear and adrenaline refused to let me stop running. I collapsed as soon as I made it inside and tried to focus on not going into cardiac arrest from not only running so hard, but out of fear for my life. I tried to remember everything I'd learned in the Army about the 2 mile recovery drill. It helped a little. Anyone who's been in even a remotely similar situation can understand why I never called the police. After much needed water and heavy breathing, it was 30 minutes before I could even put a chain of complete rational thoughts together due to the shock and mental, physical exhaustion caused by what just happened, by which time the guy would be long gone. I remember all I could think about was how the hell I didn't hear him getting that close to me after 5 whole minutes of walking, especially with him being under the influence and me being sober. Needless to say, after double checking all the doors and windows, I fell into a paranoid sleep, gripping a kitchen knife soon after. The next day, I came to find that a young teenage girl had been essayed and killed behind the same store around the time I had been leaving the previous night. Her throat had been and her body dumped not far from where she'd been essayed. Every person that lived behind the store was tested against the semen found inside the girl's body, and not one was a match.